Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces. So for today's Office Hours, I want to talk about a challenge that I find is increasingly common for advisors who are trying to grow. And it's the difficulty in winning a client away from another advisor they're already working with. In the past, this was somewhat less common, as a lot of clients that we as advisors would work with either were previously do-it-yourselfers who didn't already have an advisor, or maybe even had just gone through some kind of wealth creation event, like selling a business or retiring and getting a lump sum rollover from their pension for the first time. So they hadn't previously had the liquid wealth to work with an advisor, and now they did. So they were a new client. But increasingly, research from folks like Cerulli finds that more and more often, advisors are getting clients who already have a relationship with another advisor. Whether that's simply because the growing adoption of financial planning in the marketplace, more firms that used to only do work with high net worth clients have come down market, and even a lot of direct-to-consumer plans like Schwab and Fidelity, and now even Vanguard, that historically just provided the mutual fund products, the brokerage platform to self-directed investors, are now rolling out their own advisored solutions to the clients that have already used their existing products and services. And this matters because the dynamics of winning a new client away from an existing advisor are different than just winning a new client who's never worked with an advisor. And this was something that really hit home for me pretty early in my career. So the second firm that I worked at in the business, our marketing approach was to do seminars on revocable living trusts and estate planning, and use that as a way to open the conversation about comprehensive financial planning. So at the time, consumers were much less familiar with revocable living trusts even than they are today. Estate tax exemptions were much lower. Back in 2001, it was only $675,000. So just any young couple with term insurance to protect the family for young kids had an estate tax problem and a potential probate issue. And so revocable living trusts combined with estate planning conversations was a pretty compelling topic. And we brought in a lot of business that way. And I remember we had a particular prospective client who came to one of our seminars. She was actually a recent widow who had this revocable living trust that her now former husband had set up, and she didn't know what to actually do with it now that he passed away. And her existing broker, he was a broker at a large firm in the area that shall go nameless, had not done much of anything to help her, as he was primarily her husband's broker and not her. She had no real relationship with him. And so we met with her and talked her through the situation, the help that she would need to sell the estate. And in this process, we discovered that her broker wasn't taking very good care of her portfolio either. So this was back in 2001. We were still in the bear market and kind of the unwind of the tech bubble. And the broker had been buying a lot of individual stocks, including a lot of the tech companies that were getting slaughtered at that point. And she was paying a small mountain load of transaction costs to the broker for each trade. It was arguably borderline churning. And by the end of the meeting, it became pretty clear that she wanted to and needed to change advisors away from her former broker and over at our firm that was actually doing financial planning and could introduce her to an accountant to help sell the estate and could help her with all the administrative paperwork to move money around under the terms of the trust and to fix her portfolio into something that was more diversified and a lower cost. Our AUM fee was going to be materially cheaper than the volume of trading commissions that were already happening in her account at the time. So she left our office at the end of the meeting with a plan to come back for a meeting the follow-up week to sit down with the accountant we had a good relationship with. We were going to bring him in to start the process of selling the estate and to begin the paperwork process to transfer accounts to manage this inheritance. And then the day before the meeting was supposed to happen, she called and left a message after hours, after everyone got home, so we didn't even get it until the morning of the meeting, saying that she needed to reschedule. No rescheduling date in the message, though. So we called her back the next day. Couldn't reach her. Called her twice more that week. Couldn't reach her. Tried to be nice. I mean, we weren't pestering her. We had an accountant ready and waiting in the wings to start working with her to sell the estate, and she said she wanted to move forward with us. And after another week of leaving her messages, we finally got a message in response, again, left on our voicemail after business hours, that said she decided to stay with her current broker after all, and thanks for our time, and that was that. The one who hadn't helped her with any of her problems was making terrible investment recommendations, costing way more than what we would charge her anyways, all of which we clearly shown her in the first meeting. That was who she was staying with and not coming to work with us. And I suspect a lot of you listening to this office hours have at some point had a similar experience, talking to a prospect who's not being served well by their current existing advisor or advisor who's really just a product salesperson that sold them a bunch of stuff and may not have even been good in the first place. And the prospect says they want to work with you and move forward, and at the last minute decides to stay with the former advisor or broker after all. Have you had this happen to you where you lost a prospect that you thought was certain to follow through because they balked when the time came to actually terminate the other advisor? Or have you even been the terminated advisor where the client didn't even want to deal with the situation, so you just find out because one day the accounts transfer out and they're already gone? Ultimately, what I'd failed to realize with this prospect, being earlier in my career, not having been in that situation very often, is how hard it actually is for most people to fire their former advisor. After all, this is a relationship business. Most people don't like to terminate relationships and fire people they have a relationship with, regardless of the fact that it may not be the healthiest relationship in the first place, and they may not be terribly well served. Because for most people, it's just easier to avoid the confrontation. And that's what was happening in this situation. I didn't realize at the time, but it wasn't a coincidence that the widow kept calling us after normal business hours to leave messages that she was rescheduling, and then wouldn't take a direct call from us to reschedule, and then ultimately told us that she wasn't going to work with us in another after-hours call. She didn't like the confrontation. She didn't want to feel like she was being put on the spot. So she avoided that confrontational situation with us. And avoiding that confrontational situation is also why she decided not to work with us. Because simply put, she wasn't comfortable actually firing the broker and terminating the relationship when the time came. So I don't actually know how that conversation went. Maybe he pleaded with her that he would do a better job servicing going forward. Maybe she questioned the trading activity and he said he'd tone it down. Maybe she called out the trading commissions and he said he'd get a lower price on execution. This was, back at the time, about $1 million account, which is a sizable account for most advisors today, but was a very sizable prospect 17 years ago. So I'm sure the broker did whatever he could do to preserve the relationship and keep the business. He said he'd get better or give her better service or give her better pricing or whatever reasonable concession he could make to keep her as a client. And that doesn't even consider the fact that, unfortunately, some advisors and brokers are even less ethical in their tactics to keep clients. Maybe he tried to scare her with all the bad things that could happen if they went to us, complete strangers, instead of staying with him, the broker she and her husband had worked with all these years. Maybe he took a really aggressive tone in the conversation just to make her want to back down from the confrontation. Maybe he tried to guilt her about leaving because he was the one her husband picked, or that he needed her account to keep his job or make his numbers or feed his family or put his kids through college. I hope that wasn't the case, but in my career, I have literally seen all of those situations come up as ways former advisors or brokers tried to keep their clients, some of those more than once. And the mistake we'd made at the time, simply put, it was, again, we underestimated how hard the former, or hopefully soon to be former, advisor was going to try to keep her business. And even more important, we hadn't done anything to prepare her for that challenge. So what should you do about this? If you're talking to a prospective client who's going to be leaving that hopefully soon to be former advisor or broker to come work with you, you have to prepare them for that conversation. That may mean actually saying, I'm so glad you've agreed to work with us and we're excited to start working with you, but I need to warn you that when you tell your former advisor you're leaving, he's going to try to keep your business and win you back. Have you given any thought to how you're going to handle that situation? And then just let them talk. In practice, I find some prospects say, no, he's done a terrible job with them. We're through. To which we'll say, great, how are you going to break the news? Because I actually want to see, are they going to send him an email and avoid the confrontation? Are they going to call him and tell him? And based on what we know from the client so far, do I think that's going to work out? We certainly have some clients who I know will not have a problem confronting a former advisor who's doing a bad job for them. They're very comfortable with this confrontation. But for others, it's an issue. And they may say, I hadn't even thought about that. And then they start reflecting on it. And we might even extend that conversation a little bit further. Yes, I know one of the reasons you've decided to work with us is that your former advisor charges you a lot more than we do. Have you considered what you'll say if he offers to cut his fees to match us? And then again, stop talking. And just let the prospect talk through and kind of process how they're going to handle the situation. They say, well, because actually if he cuts his fees, I'll have to think about that. Okay, well then that's a hint to us, we have not sufficiently differentiated or demonstrated our value because it's apparently just about price? Or do they say, I don't care if he cuts his fees, I'm done with him? Great, because once they've said it out loud, even to themselves, they're much more likely to be committed to actually follow through on it and fire when the time comes. Now, I know a few advisors that have an entire script that they run with prospects around this. I talked to one who actually tells prospective clients to role play with him. If the former advisor says this, how will you respond? I'm going to ask it now. Tell me what you'll do. And what will you say next? What if you respond this way? Technically, that's actually probably a good way to help clients bolster their courage, but I have to admit, it's a little bit too salesy for my style, at least, to actually tell prospective clients that they have to role play with me through the situation of firing their former advisor, unless they just outright say, I'm afraid he's going to push me to stay, help me, and then maybe we'll go a little deeper. But I do try to raise this question, and I think it's really important. If your former advisor tries to convince you to stay, have you given any thought to how you're going to handle that situation? Or if the advisor offers to cut his fees to match us, have you considered what you'll say? Or even just, hey, I'm just curious, how are you going to break the news to your former advisor? Because just asking them the question and letting them talk through it, even if we don't give any suggestions, which technically would be pretty biased anyway, since obviously we're trying to win the prospect's business ourselves. But the mere fact that we raise the question and let them talk it through themselves still helps them to better prepare themselves for that conversation and potential confrontation. So they're not caught off guard and then tempted to back down when they unexpectedly find that their former advisor gets very proactive or sometimes outright aggressive in trying to win and keep their business. In fact, I find with some prospects that they just decide actually to start transfers now just to avoid confronting the advisor and just let him or her find out when the money leaves. For some, that's more comfortable than any kind of confrontation. I know, because unfortunately it's also happened to us one or two times over the years as well, where clients decided that they didn't want to work with us anymore and were so nervous about telling us and terminating the relationship and knowing that we were probably going to make a pitch to try to keep their business that they deliberately didn't tell us. And we didn't find out until the money suddenly transferred out. Or we get an email or we get an after-hours voicemail because they don't want to feel the confrontational pressure of telling us face-to-face because they know we're going to try to win the business. That's what most of us do. And again, the more that the industry shifts from our roots to product salespeople to actual advisors who have ongoing advice relationships with clients, the more this will matter in the future. Now, the good news again is that in general, the mere fact that they're in your office talking to you as a potential new advisor means they're unhappy enough with their current advisor or broker that they're considering whether to leave, or they wouldn't be meeting with you in the first place. So your odds are good. That's good news, at least. But again, don't make the mistake that I made in the early years. Don't underestimate the real challenge and pressure that most clients feel in the moment when they have to break the news to a soon-to-be former advisor or broker that he or she is being fired and the relationship is being terminated, and how far a lot of people will go, including staying with very bad advisors and brokers, just to avoid that confrontation. Which means anything you can do to help prepare them in advance, even if it's just to point out that it will be a challenge and invite them to think through how they'll handle it, can make a big difference in bolstering their courage and confidence to actually do it and terminate a bad advisor and follow through on hiring you when the time comes. In any event, I hope this is helpful as some food for thought. This is Office Hours with Michael Kitces, 1 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesdays. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.